Hey there everybody, and welcome to the next video in the updated How to Create a Social or Sharing App series. So in the first video I did a quick overview of this application, but in today's video I'm going to be walking through how to get this initial sign up page working. So the first thing that we're doing in this series is actually getting the backend set up and just allowing users to log in. So first things first, we are going to head over to Firebase. So you can go to firebase.google.com and then you can enter in your project name. So you have a couple of different options here, but what I'm going to be doing is we'll just call it test 123. Now you need to make a special note of this unique identifier here because it's not your project name that we're going to be using in the future. It's the unique identifier here. So make sure that you set that aside somewhere. You will still be able to access it, but you're definitely going to need that regularly available. You can choose to enable Google Analytics if you would like. You can select an account. I'm just going to use the default account. And then you'll wait for your project to get created. Now, a couple of things to note while we're getting this set up. You can add additional features and functionality, but we're going to set this up as a really basic application. So it's going to have some security, but it's going to be kind of minimal. For liability reasons, I'm not going to cover the security settings. That's going to be on you to set up. So throughout this series, just make sure that you're cognizant of the fact that this is going to be something, if you need advanced security, that you'll need to work out on your end in Firebase and AppGyver. So now that Firebase is loaded up, you'll see that we have test 123. Now you'll see I'm in I think this is the native view in Firebase, but there are a couple of different views. So if your Firebase account, when you get into build and Firestore database, if it starts to look a little different, just check out the Firebase documentation and look at how to get into the different view. I believe this is the native view though. So first thing that we need to do in Firebase is we are going to go over to authentication under the build tab. Now we'll need to click get started. And then we are just setting up the native email and password. And then I'm going to click save. Now for those of you who want to add a little bit of creativity and just make it look more professional, you can go over to templates. This is the templates that are being sent for the different user account related, we'll just say events. So the email verification, this is the email that's going to be sent to your users when they sign up to create an account. So you can click edit template and edit certain fields to make it look a little bit more professional. That way, for example, if you wanted to update certain parts just to make it look a little bit more professional and catered to your app, you can. And if you want to see what this looks like when you're done, I'll show you once we're done with this video. You'll know how to use the create account button, which will help you walk through the basics of actually making your account, and you'll get that verification email. For now though, we have no users. And if you want, once you have users added in, you can manage them from here. You can delete, disable, or reset their password. So we have authentication set up. Next up, just to be safe, we're going to go ahead and get this Firestore database set up, but we'll walk through what this does a little bit later. So we're just going to click create database. And then we're going to start in production. And for this, set the location nearest, if I'm not mistaken, to where most of your user base will be. This just helps to increase speed by making sure they're closer to servers, etc. Now make sure you read all of these warnings. For example, you can't change this later. But as you can see, now we have dropped into our Firestore database. Now you'll see this ID right here that we covered earlier, and it's also up here in this URL next to project, in between the forward slashes, just for you to check out. And this is basically all that we need to do right now in Firebase as far as the initial setup. Now we do need to go to our settings and get our web API key. This is very important for when we're actually getting set up with users. So we're going to go to Project Overview, Settings, Project Settings, and you should see a web API key here at this point. This is not something that you want to share with people, so just as a heads up to you. All right, so we will click copy. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start adding some of this into our application. So when you go into AppGyver, if you have a new page, you have a couple of choices. So we're setting up the Firebase authentication. So when we are logged in, there's an auth tab right here, which stands for authentication. You can remove it if you have it previously, but there's an enable authentication button, and you can essentially set that. And when you do, you'll be able to choose your initial view. Now at this point, what we're going to do is we're just using the default view. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up our connector. So what I mean by connector is when we go to data, connectors, you'll see we have Google Firebase. Yours should be turned off by default. So you'll just click to enable it, and then you're going to fill out all this information. Don't worry, I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be setting it up for all of these configuration options, just in case you decide you want to build it for any of these app types. But the idea here is we have all of these different types of settings, etc. So we're just going to be updating the different options here. So in this case, we are going to make sure that we have Firebase pulled up in a separate tab just to make it easier to bounce back and forth between them. But you'll see right here, for example, the API key is already available or an option. So we are going to get Firebase pulled up on the right, and then we will get AppGyver pulled up on the left. Usually makes it a little bit easier to enter this information. So in Firebase, we're going to go to Project Overview, and now we're at our home page. So we are going to create a new application. So in this case, you should see a screen that looks just like this. So we'll just start with Apple. And you're going to register your app. So everything I'm about to do, you need to set relevant to your application. So I'll just put com.company.test123. And you're going to enter in your app name and store ID. And then you'll click Download Google Services Info plist. And if you need to add your SDK, you can. If you need to add your initialization code, you can. And then you can continue to console. That seems pretty straightforward. Now, this may look a little bit intimidating, but don't let it intimidate you at all. So this you can open in Visual Studio Code. I believe you can open it in Notepad. It doesn't really matter. But the idea is this is the information that you need for this over here on the left-hand side. So you can just hit Control F over here. And if we need the app ID first, you can just type in ID. And then you'll just look for the app ID. So we have Google App ID down here. It may be easier. Sometimes you can just type in app. And you're really just looking for the information. Now, in this case, I don't believe I set an app ID when I was going through Firebase, so I don't actually have one. But you'd be looking for something similar to this right here. So you'd be looking for some kind of an app ID that can be used. Now, in this case, again, I don't have one because I didn't add all of the details I needed in Firebase. But the idea is whatever you need, you can just type in here and then find it on this side. So typically, you can find sender ID, bundle ID. So for example, let's just say this was the app ID. We could copy it over. But again, you're looking for your app ID on the right. And when you find it, you'll just copy and paste it right here. Now I'm going to look for the API key, which is right here. So you would just copy the API key itself, which is going to be in between the string characters. So just the letters and numbers, and you'll paste it in right here. Then you'll repeat for the client ID. So we'll just type in client, and you'll see client ID right here. And all we have to do is copy what's in between those little string fields and paste it in right here. So we've finished the setup for Apple. Now let's add Android. Same exact process. You'll type in the name, nickname, debug, certificate if you have one. And then it'll give you the option to download this JSON file. And then you'll go to Next. you can add the SDK, which may be needed for some, and then continue to console. Now we'll click this, and right here, you'll see we have something that looks somewhat similar, and the process is identical. You will just hit Control F, type in the name of what you're looking for, and you'll just try to find it. So in this case, you'll look for app ID first, and if I'm not mistaken, it's actually in multiple places. So you can scroll through and look for, again, just the text that is related to app ID. So it should be this mobile SDK one, so you can use this one right here. And then we're looking for the API key. You'll type in API, and you'll find the current key right here, and you'll just copy what's in between the quotes right into the Android API key, and then you'll do the same for client ID. And you'll see right here we have info, and you'll just be able to type in this mobile SDK app ID. So you have a couple of different client options, but you're, again, just looking for client ID. So you'll notice when there are multiple, you'll just have to see if you can find the one that is the most relevant, or that is, as odd as it sounds, looks correct. So I typically default to something like, under client info, you'll have this app ID. So I would typically default to something like this. And then lastly, we will go add app, and we will add a web app. So in this case, we'll just name it whatever we want to call it. You can choose to set up Firebase hosting, and we'll get this SDK file. Now, what I love about the web app is everything you need is already right here. So web app ID, you have right here. You just grab what's in quotes. The web API key is going to be already set up right here in quotes. And the same thing here, project ID, you should be able to find project ID right here. And then auth domain, you should be able to find auth domain right here. Measurement ID, you should be able to find right here. Storage bucket right here. And then message sender ID is right here. I'm not adding or updating over here on the left-hand side because this is the actual sale copy of the social sharing app. So I'm making sure that your screen's going to look pretty much identical to mine. So you're just updating all of these. Now, an important thing to note, if you're not using iOS or Android, you can turn this slider off and just leave web app configuration on. This way you have all of the details to go ahead and send and receive data and basically connect to your database. Now, the last thing we're going to do for this initial part of the setup, or second to last, is we're going to go and create an app variable for our API key. So you can go to data, or I apologize, you can go to variables, and then you can look at all of your app variables. You should not have any unless you bought this already. And you can just click API key, or if you don't already have one, you'll just click Add App Variable, and then you will name it API capital K-E-Y, just to make sure you're adding it and making it the same. So you would just type in API K-E-Y, and then in the initial value, that's where you're going to paste in the API key of your app. So again, we've already grabbed that right here, and it should be in the setup page of the app. That's the one you're going to want to use. So you'll see in this case, I have API key right here, and I already have an API key saved. So I will just remove this one, which I don't need, and then we have just this API key with the initial value, which is the API key. So we basically have that initial part set up. Now at this point, you have the basic background details. Now you need to go click up here to look at all of the pages in your mobile app. And the next thing we're looking for is Firebase authentication. That's the default name for the login page. So when you click this, you get a page that looks similar to this. Yours will not have the same background colors. It'll look a little bit more simple. But the idea here is this is the page where users are going to go to log in. So the first things first, you're going to click on the first input field, and you're going to set up a variable for this. So in this case, it's a page variable for email. And you'll make sure that the password is set up for a page variable as well. So if those do not already exist, you can just go to the variables slider, go to page variable, and go to email and password and just add page variable for both of these. Then you should have a login page by default, so we'll walk through what that logic looks like. So if you just select the login button, you'll be able to bring up this panel here. So most of this should already be there for you, but I'm going to walk you through what you need. So first thing, on component tap, you're going to have this little show spinner option, and then you're going to have this auth option here, email and password authentication. Now, if you don't know how to find this, you can actually install it by going to the marketplace and typing in email, and you'll see email authentication. You can just click it and click install, and it'll appear in this installed section, and you can drag it over. It should already be installed for you, but if it's not, you can just click it and drag it over. So again, it's just this auth email and password authentication. And then you'll make sure that component tap is connected to show spinner and that it's connected to email and password authentication. Now in this case, we have a hide spinner component, and you can grab that over here. So you'll see we have a show, and somewhere in here there's a hide spinner as well. And it's connected to both nodes. So you'll just drag your line over here, and you'll do that for both the top and bottom, which is basically success and failure. So either way, the spinner is going to be hidden. Then we're going to have the next logic. So the first thing, we will drag over a toast message. And in this case, you'll see we have alert failed to log in. All right, so one thing to note with this toast message here, just as a little bit of a sidebar. So the toast message is basically a dialogue that appears anytime something happens. So in this case, what we've done is we've dragged over a toast message and connected it to the bottom output for this Firebase authentication. Now, when you go to outputs, you can see output at port 1, which is the first one, and everything that happens there, which you don't need to know, or for the most part. And then output at port 2 is error. So all you need to know is the second port is a failure. So you have two choices. When you click this toast message, you can either type in the text here that you want it to say, and then just connect the two, or you can actually do an output and choose the error information from this node here. Now, since I'm probably going to be a little bit newer to AppGyver, we'll avoid doing that, but it's really helpful for troubleshooting. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have an if condition. This is an incredibly powerful tool. So what we will do is we are going to scroll over here and drag over this if condition, and we're just going to connect it to the first one, which is the first node of this email authentication. When we click the if condition, we are going to type this out. Now, if you don't want to type, if you want to type it out, just pause the video and set it up right now. Or another option is you can go to output of another node and click this and find the credential for email. So you can scroll through, and basically you're looking for email is verified or user is verified. So you'll see email verified true false under user. When you click that, this screen will go away, and then you'll notice something set up here. Then you can actually click it again and go to formula, and it will have the entire thing typed out for you. So basically what we're doing is we're checking for an if statement to see if this is true or false. And in this case, if output of email password authentication, or is user credential.user.email verified, basically saying if this is verified, then we're going to do this. If it's not, we're going to do this. So if it's not, we're going to drag over another toast message that says, please verify your email before logging in. And that's just going to be connected to the bottom one. And as we know, we can click on outputs, and you can view your outputs at port 1 and 2. But the idea here is the way we've written this if the email is verified, we're going to move forward. If it's not, this is going to happen. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring over this set auth state persistence. Most of this should already be set up for you, but you just want to make sure you have the right setup. Now, if you need to grab this, you can go to the marketplace and install it as we've done previously, which is right here. And you can just drag it over and connect it to the top of our if condition. And then from here, we're going to have the bottom node connected to a toast message. And that toast message says error, please refresh and try again. And at the top, we will have another toast message successfully logged in. And then it will be connected to dismiss initial view. What dismiss initial view does is basically goes into the application. So you'll see it dismisses initial view and loads rest of the app. So that's all we have for login. Now we're just going to walk through create account really quickly. Now what I've done is I wanted this to be a little bit unique. So when we type in a@a.com, just like a sample email, if we click create account, this button appears. And then when we click it again, you'll get an empty message in this case, but it will normally say verification email sent. Now in this case, I believe I probably already used this user. So we'll try a different one and you'll see it says verification email sent. Click the link in your email to verify. So when we click create account, you'll see that in the logic, all it's doing is hiding itself and showing the create account button. So if you ever want to show or hide components, you have a couple of choices. By default, I have the actual create account button hidden. So you can check if something's visible or not by seeing this value here. So I've selected the actual create account button, which is hidden by default, and I've set the visible value to false. Then when I click create account, I have installed two components. First is hide, and then the other one is show component. So throughout the app, you can set something to hide or show. And then if you want it hidden by default, you'll just make sure that this select or the visible value is set to false. So in this case, I have a button on this page called create a new account, which is set to false visible by default. And this button here, which is visible, when you click it, it's going to hide itself. And to do that, you'll just drag over your hide component, select the component to hide. In this case, it'll usually tell you which component they're hiding. So you will have it hide itself if you want to do this. And then you will hide any other components that you don't want visible. And then you'll drag over the show component and select the component that you want to show. Now in this case, since I have so many components on the page, I would recommend that you name your components. So to do this, anytime you select a component, you can go to Advanced Properties and change the display name here. But in this case, we just have the Create Account button. Now we'll go through this logic. It looks much more complicated than it actually is, and then we will be able to close out this first video. So what we have here is a Create Account button. You can add that in whatever you want it to look like, and then we're going to add in the following logic, some of which may already be on your page. I'm not quite sure. So the first thing we're going to do, you'll have event tap by default. You're going to drag over an if condition, and this is what your if condition is going to say. So we'll move this over here to make it a little bit easier to kind of understand the flow. So as you know, you go to core and drag over your if condition, and when you select it, we're going to bind it to a formula, and we're going to just type this out. Is underscore email, and then in parentheses, the page variable for email. Now, a quick thing to help speed the process up, anytime you want to find a page variable, you can type in page v and see page vars dot, and what's on the right of the period is going to be the page variables that you have. So in this case, I'll close this, but this is basically just checking to make sure that the email is an actual email. If it's not, you're going to connect a toast message to the bottom node and it's just going to say valid email required. If it is an email, we're going to have a second if condition. This if condition you'll drag over just like the last one, and then you're going to go to a formula, and you're going to set this, not parentheses. I'll close that out because I actually moved that. So not, and then open parentheses, is underscore empty, open parentheses, pagevars.password, close parentheses, close parentheses. What this is doing is making sure that the password field is not empty. So on the bottom of this, you will have this toast message saying valid password required connected to this bottom node here, because basically this is saying if this if condition is false, that means that the password field is empty, so they need to enter a password. But if it's true, then we're going to do this data sign up option. So in this case, you can look for sign up in the field, in the little flow function market, if you don't see it. But if I'm not mistaken, it's actually, it might be in here by default. So these are broken up by category. So in this case, I don't see the sign up field here, so we'll go to installed. And you have sign out, which we'll need at some point. And then we have get current user. So I'm not seeing the actual sign up field. So in this case, this is actually not a custom component. This is one we're going to be building together. So this is a relatively simple process, but it will require you to pause the video a little bit. So what you need is the HTTP request. So when we move this over, you'll see that we have the option to name it. So what I did here is if you just put sign, it says sign. I just called mine sign up. So you'll connect this to the top node of your if condition, and then in your data, you're going to make sure HTTP method is set to post. You're going to make sure that your request body type is JSON. We don't need any advanced. And then the URL is going to be this right here, which I'm actually going to paste in the video description. That way you don't have to pause the video and type it out. And then you will go down to your request body, and this is what you're sending over. Page variable, which we already have, and then return secure token true. So the idea here is you're just going to paste in this and the URL into this data signup, and then in the failed toast message below, you will set up, connected to both of the lower nodes, what we're going to have it set up is the output of another node, and then the sign up, or you can do receive event, but the sign up, and then we're looking for the error. So you're doing the error message that's displayed here will show up in an error message for the user. Then we have a couple steps left. So you're going to go to the data again, and we're going to bring over another HTTP request, and we're going to, this one's just send verification email. So I will paste this in the link to this, or in the description of this video as well, but the URL is going to be this right here, and you'll notice this app variable is the one that we've already saved. So this is how it knows which database to send this to. You'll make sure it's a post, and then the response body will be this. Request type, it tells you the ID token, response body ID token. So that's all set up exactly as it should be. I'll copy and paste that in the description of this video. And then we need to set a couple of items. So I don't think this is 100% necessary, but it's from another video that I've watched online on Udemy, so I'm going to add it in here just as a precaution. So we are going to set an app variable to, we're going to call it ID token. And then you're going to set 2 items to storage. And then we'll just show a button. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to app variable, and you're going to call it ID token, spelled just like this, lowercase I-D, capital T-O-K-E-N. And we don't have any initial value for this. So what we will do next is we are going to go back to our create. And now that we have the app variable, you can just drag the set app variable option over and click the variable from your dropdown. And then the assigned value is going to be this right here. You can actually type this one out. It's probably going to be a little bit easier to type it out. If it's in red saying it's not assignable to text, you can ignore it. We're just typing out outputs, the brackets, with quotes, sign up, .resbody.id token. Feel free to pause the video if you need to type that out. And then we're going to set item to storage. So you can find that from this menu here. So typically when you're scrolling through, you can go and find get record collection, alerts, set data variable. You may need to install this one. We'll just type it in the component market to see. And you can install set item to storage. In this case, I have called the item key ID token, and the data to store is just this right here. So you can pause the video if you just want to type this out, but it's basically the output of the sign-up function ID token. Then we're going to set one more item to storage. We'll call it refresh token, and the T is capital. And the data to store, you can pause the video here. It's relatively simple. It's the output of the sign-up, and we're grabbing the response or the refresh token. Then we're going to show component, which you don't really need. This is basically just showing a different component on the page to allow everything to work a little bit more seamlessly. But then what we're going to do is finish it up with a toast message verification email sent, and it's only connected to the top node of the send verification email. And then the failures are going to say invalid email. So that completes everything on this page. The only other thing to note is on the page layout. We're going to set this up really, really quickly. So we're going to grab this authentication get user so you can install it. It looks like this right here, get current user. And then we're going to connect each of these three to a hide spinner option. And then the top one is going to dismiss the initial view. The idea here is if we get a user and it works, then we're going to dismiss the initial view and log them into the app. Otherwise, we're just going to stay on the page. So that completes everything for this first video. I know that this was relatively difficult, but this is probably one of the harder parts of the application, and it does add a layer of security. Again, make sure you're managing your security to the needs of your users and your app. But let's go ahead. The next video is going to go more into detail in getting this application set up.